So I have a cool story as I begin. Yesterday, our church had our annual Easter egg hunt, and we do it over at the Hub Hotel with the children and families who are living at the Hospitality Hub in the Hub Hotel. And I was with one of our parishioners there, Jessica Dempster-White, who works at the Metal Museum. As you know, the Metal Museum is moving from its location downtown out to Overton Park, and so they are packing up all of their belongings and the things that the artists have made over the year. And the resident artist, who's long been there, the director of Metal Studios, Jim Masterson, was helping pack up some things, and Jessica noticed this heart necklace. And she said, "What is that?" And he said, "Oh, that's made from the iron beams that we salvaged from the wreckage of First United Methodist Church." And Jessica shared with him that our two congregations were actually going to be worshiping together this weekend. And he said, "Well, you take one and you take one for your pastor." So I am wearing a heart on my chest today that is deeply tied to our beloved friendship between our two churches. So this past week, I treated myself to lunch solo at my favorite Japanese restaurant in Midtown. And as I was getting ready to leave, a clergy friend walked in with another person who I also know and hadn't seen in a really long time. And so I greeted her and was kind of checking in, asking how she's doing. And inevitably, our greeting included me asking the question, "And how are the kids?" Before she could answer, my clergy friend said, "There it is. Do you know that there is a tribe in Africa who ask that question as their primary greeting, as their way of saying hello to one another?" We talked more about that, and I went home, and of course, I had to research all about this. And sure enough, the Maasai people of Kenya and Tanzania greet each other by saying "Kasirian Ingera," which literally translates to "and how are the children?" That is their hello. The response, "Sapati Ingera," means "the children are well." So this group of approximately 1 million people, known as being cattle herders and fierce warriors, connect with one another on the most basic level in their daily greeting by centering the well-being of children. Not particular children of the folks exchanging greetings, the collective of children. Isn't that amazing? An amazing way to say hello. It feels so much more substantive than our "hello, how are you?" especially when we ask that question on autopilot and half the time don't even actually have the time to listen if someone were to actually answer and tell you how they're doing. This greeting offers a peek into the values of this community. It's an insight into their moral compass. For the Maasai, the safety and well-being of the children is foremost, and as such, it is the barometer for the state of all things. It's beautiful to think that the children are at the front and at the top of mind in this culture. I think we can all agree that children are important, yes? There are many cultures that view children as the greatest symbol of wealth, or as the primary way of knowing whether or not you are blessed by God. Children represent the future. They represent hope and possibility. They remind us that human life and the life of the community continues on even while acknowledging that all of us will eventually die. Children remind us that God is forever beginning a new story with humanity. So it's Palm Sunday, one of my favorite Sundays of the year, a Sunday that reminds us that even as the darkest arc of the Jesus story is a mere few days away, Jesus enters Jerusalem with a party. A celebration with palms waving and cheers. Last year I talked about how the praise of the crowds on Palm Sunday were really something akin to a protest. Because just like the millions of people marching all over this country yesterday, The people were cheering for change, cheering on this Jesus person who many had only heard about, was cheering for the possibility and the hope that this kind of religious leadership represented. Cheering for the one who sees the poor and advocates on their behalf, the one who approaches the sick and disfigured and touches them, healing them, the one who welcomes those who have been cut off from society, kicked out of the temples. That's cheering for something different than the norms and the leaders and the powers of the time. I was listening to my favorite lectionary commentary this week, and one of the texts that they were reading was this Matthew text, which is in the lectionary for this week, and one of the panelists honed in on a line that I think I have overlooked all these many years. Hear it with me again. But when the chief priests and scribes saw the amazing things that he did and heard the children crying out in the temple and saying, "Hosanna to the Son of David," they became angry and said to him, "Do you hear what these are saying?" Jesus said to them, "Yes, have you never read? Out of the mouths of infants and nursing babies, you have prepared praise for yourself." The panelist on the commentary made note that it was when they saw the amazing things that Jesus was doing and when they saw the children cheering for him that the chief priests and scribes became angry. The children cheering made them angry. Now, why? Well, this panelist pointed out that perhaps it's because the religious authorities can't condemn and punish children in the same ways that they can adults. They can't kick children out of the synagogues as easily because they're only children. You can't berate them as a warning to others in quite the same way because they're only children. They're just kids, right? I do think that's a good point, but I would go a little deeper and ask us to consider what it is that children represent. In the same way that the Messiah used the status of children as their check-in point, their wellness check on the people, the children represent the future. The children carry the hope of the people. So if these children in Jerusalem are hearing stories and witnessing how Jesus is talking about the poor, seeing those who are invisible, healing the sick, making space for the outcasts, and bringing to the forefront those who have been forgotten, the children have enough of their own moral compass to know that these are powerful actions and that, boy, they seem to be good. Children are more apt to see the world in simpler terms. They seek fairness and justice in the ways that adults seem to cloud our senses up of right and wrong. We muddy the sense of right and wrong with societal rules and complexities that maybe don't need to be there. Children cheer for goodness and fairness and love. These children cheering represented a clear and present danger for the religious authorities who were seeing their own power circumvented by someone breaking through all the layers of bureaucracy and the norms and the conveniences of how religion was being practiced. The children, the future, was cheering for someone doing something very different from what the authorities were doing, and they didn't like it. It made them angry. It probably scared them. I found myself thinking a lot this week about the role of children in religion and society. My daughters are 8, 7, and 6 years old, so you can imagine that I spend quite a bit of time thinking about and communicating with, or trying to communicate with, children. As I've watched my girls this week, I've wondered, are you really capable of making the powers of today angry? If you cheer for something that is different than what the ones in control want, could you 3 be a threat? As a side note, I will say that children do have an intense, innate sense of justice. And I know this because of the number of times they come to me and my spouse and tell on each other because they believe that a great injustice has been done by one of their siblings. As I've watched my girls this week, I've watched them through the lens of realizing how important they are, how much the authorities of today, religious, political, business, and all the other powers and authorities of today are vying for their allegiance. Just scan the news headlines. There is legislation moving through our systems today trying to force the establishment of student organizations that have a particular political perspective on every high school campus. A longtime friend from Louisiana sent me a message this week asking for me to give some insights into what she should do because it is now the law in the state of Louisiana that every classroom display a poster of the 10 Commandments. Some want to make it illegal for a child to see a drag queen or a trans person or a rainbow flag anywhere. Local library boards are banning books, firing librarians who refuse to remove certain books, and we're talking about prize-winning literary classics in many of these cases. So yeah, children are that powerful. But hear this, the kids, for now, the kids are all right. Research shows us that since 2008, there has been a surge in the amount of empathy in our youth. Perhaps that's why some of the tech bros have tried to demonize the term empathy altogether. Our youngest ones have a great sense of global awareness. They have great concerns for inclusiveness and issues of social conscience. They care more about the environment than older generations. While many fear that our young people are lost into the abyss of their screens and devices, since 2023, Generation Alpha, 8 to 15-year-olds, are coming offline. Walking vacations, whatever that is, and weekend hangouts with friends are on the rise. There's been a 16% increase in kids adding physical toys to wish lists since 2023, and board game popularity is up nearly 10% since 2023, showing a renewed appreciation for offline play and interaction. Studies show that Gen Alpha is motivated by justice and compassion, desiring to make a real-world impact through service rather than just passive entertainment. The youth today desire a more equitable world, and it even influences their parents' spending and consumption choices. And perhaps the scariest reality for the powers that be is that data suggests that as they mature, children today are expected to advocate for diverse representation in leadership, for social equity, and they want corporate responsibility. So the kids are all right. And in the text we read today from over 2,000 years ago, the kids were all right. And it makes the powerful grown-ups angry. So what about us? All right, our 2 historic churches down here on this city block in downtown Memphis. What about us? Once or twice a year, our congregations have a youth Sunday or some activity where we turn the focus to our children and let them lead, and it makes us feel good and hopeful about the future. And I have a question for us. How often do we think about how powerful our children are? How often are we asking ourselves as communities, like the Messiah, and how are the children? How often are we putting the children at the center of how we think about ourselves as progressive, mainline, Protestant, Christian communities? My friends, the data here on that question is not good. While the kids may be all right in that they cheer for the values of Christ in this world, by and large, they aren't learning those lessons with us. Our churches have lost children. There's a researcher who I follow closely named Ryan Burge, and a couple years ago he wrote an article entitled, "Why It's Really Hard to Be Optimistic About the Mainline." And the answer? We're old. Shockingly old. For instance, according to their own records, 50% of Episcopalians have celebrated their 65th birthday, and only 13% have not yet become adults. For the PCUSA, that's us, 32% of our members are 70 or older, and 4% are children. These startling stats are true for all 7 sisters of the Mainline: the Episcopal Church, the United Church of Christ, the United Methodist Church, the Presbyterian Church USA, the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America, the Christian Church Disciples of Christ, and the American Baptist churches. All of the more progressive traditions of mainline Protestantism are in this same boat together. The kids are all right, but where are the kids? This is the question I want us to consider sitting with as we enter Holy Week this year, as we march toward the cross and the victory of the empty tomb, when we remember the faith of Jesus that led him to follow his mission of love to death, and we celebrate the victory of love over death. I want us to remember that this is the Christ who said, "Let the children come to me." The Jesus who, although children were certainly thought of as second-class citizens in his own time, placed them at the center, lifted them up, told us that if we want to enter the kingdom of heaven, we need to be like children. Earlier this year, I was doing some contract work for Duke Divinity School for this grant that they have, and I was writing a case study on Morning Star United Methodist Church in Las Cruces, New Mexico, a 40-year-old church that happens to share a property line with a middle school. Now, the families have learned that rather than navigating the chaos of the carpool line, if you've ever been in a school carpool line, say amen. Yeah. Rather than navigating the chaos of the carpool line, it is easier to pick up and drop off their kids in the parking lot of the United Methodist Church next door. Now, some of the middle schoolers would find themselves with a long wait period between that last school bell ringing and when their ride would come to get them, sometimes well over an hour. A couple of times there was even some minor vandalism and some littering at the church. So this church had a problem. Unsupervised youth on their property every weekday afternoon, the mess, the trash, the liability. The church then called a new pastor, their first female pastor, a woman pastor with kids. And while the church leadership was discussing ways to deal with this problem, including fencing off the church property so that no middle schoolers could access the church property, this pastor mom asked a simple question. What if we opened the doors and invited them in? I've heard you stressing about how there's no youth in our church, so what if we open our doors and invite these kids in? Flash forward some weeks and some meetings with the school, and Morning Star launched a volunteer-driven snack ministry for kids after school. They opened the doors, they invited them in, they offered them snacks, a place to wait outside of the weather for their rides, for their grown-ups, and they showed them hospitality and a willingness to talk with them about their lives. And within a short time, the program grew from 45 kids to over 200 kids a day coming into that church after school. A number joined the Wednesday evening youth group, which was on its last legs. The partnership with the church and this school has grown to not only make the local news, not only make the national news, but now as a part of a Lilly Grant project that I was writing this case study for that will be used as a model for churches all over the world to say, what happens when we just ask a simple question that completely changes how we look at an issue? I see a lot of similarities in the question, what if we opened the doors and invited them in, and the Maasai people checking in with each other asking, and how are the children? And so I wonder, what is the question that might reorient us to think more critically about the state of our church when it comes to children? What if we built more programs around the well-being of children? What if we asked ourselves about how children are doing more often? Even if they aren't here, even if we build programs outside of our doors that are centered around children. Our future depends on the future of the children, and here's the good news, the children are already more like us. They're already more like us than a lot of churches that have children. They want justice, they want goodness, they want fairness, just like we do. We are already so alike, and the only thing missing is the relationships that will bring us together. So that is my Holy Week charge for us. On a week full of praise, coming off of a weekend full of protests around this country yesterday, and remembering the praise as protest of the triumphal entry today, remember that the powers of Christ's day were angry and afraid of the children who cheered for Jesus. And the powers of this day are still angry and afraid of those cheers for Jesus. Real Jesus, not poster child war bro Jesus, whatever that is. Real Jesus. Let's look for the children who are cheering. Let's place them at the center. Let's open the doors, go out to meet them, and welcome them in. And all of God's children who could said, Amen.